mein...
One man, one e-bike, 1 month and a mission. 2,000 kilometers and 30,000 meters of elevation gain solo across Spain from south to north. Not along the coast, but where it hurts, but is also beautiful, across the mountains and not on roads, but on trails. I'm cycling one of the most beautiful bikepacking gravel bike adventures in the world. Who will give up first, man or machine, or will both reach the finish line, and if so, in what condition? What better place than Gibraltar to start a bikepacking tour through Spain? Gibraltar belongs to England, so it is outside the EU, and to enter you first have to go through customs and then cross the airport runway. During takeoffs and landings, the runway is of course closed to the other traffic, but crossing it is still scary. Most of the rock, as it is also known, is a nature reserve, but a small part is still used by the British military. The border runs beyond the runway, and the reason for that is that in 1783, during the last attempt to conquer it by the Spanish, the British artillery could not fire any further, and the front line at that time became the later border. "30 kilometers north in Castillo de Castellar was my first stop, a beautiful castle complex on a ridge from which you can just see Gibraltar. In 1960s there was not even drinking water up here, and the castle was abandoned when the place was discovered by artists. The castle has since been converted into a hotel. From Castillo I took my first dirt road. It had rained a lot in the last few days. There were deep puddles on the trails in the valleys. Less than 1 hour on dirt roads, my perfectly clean bike was so dirty that even the wheels were blocked.
Nee! Oh Mann!
Fortunately, the next town had a car wash with a high-pressure cleaner, but even that barely removed the clay. I spent the first night on the tour in Jimena de la Frontera in a small vacation home. No rain was actually predicted, but you could already see the rain clouds everywhere in the mountains. The following mountain range can only be bypassed with a long detour to the right or to the left. The shortest route leads 30 kilometers directly over and through it, but there are no roads, houses or cell phone service, so I had a certain amount of respect for it. It started out dry and reasonably sunny, but then, as soon as I was on my first mountain... The question is it still fog or already rain? Looks like rain, no fun at all. From here on, I had to push the bike all the way uphill. The clay had blocked the wheels again, and the stick became my best friend for scraping off the mud.
I made it to the street. Oh, it's clean, it's flat. I will stick to this. Oh. Mwah, mwah, mwah. Alter.
The next town was only a few kilometers away, and once again I had to visit the car wash. Using a hose or high-pressure cleaner to clean a bike is actually a no-go, because water can get into the engine or bearings, but the clay simply won't come off with the clothes. I didn't need to put so much effort into cleaning it, as it just kept raining for the rest of the day. Fortunately, the sun was shining the next morning and I had to go shopping in the next town. Honda is one of the most beautiful and famous towns in Andalusia, and photos of the famous bridge can be found in every travel guide.
The location was already used by the Romans for strategic reasons, and later on the village growed on both sides of the river, and there was the wish to have a bridge over it, and they built a bridge, but some years later it crashed and they built a new one, this one, and it took 40 years to finish it.
The roads were still extremely muddy from the rain, so I switched to paved side roads for the rest of the day. Ardales is a small Andalusian town with 2,500 inhabitants. Finding the accommodation in the narrow streets is sometimes not easy, even with school. Nearby is the Caminito del Rey, one of the most famous sites in Andalusia, which is a via ferrata through a spectacular canyon. Tickets must be reserved up to 3 months in advance, which I unfortunately missed. However, there is a viewpoint, although the weather was rather rainy on the south side. The rest of the way to Antequera is a constant up and down, steeply down into the valleys and then steeply back up again on the other side. The last few kilometers lead along an old irrigation path almost into the city. The area was already settled 4,000 years ago, and the Romans also left their mark here. The next day, heavy rain was predicted again from noon, and it started to drizzle right at the start. So I completed the section to Alhama de Granada as quickly as possible, but in the afternoon it became sunny again. Alhama de Granada is located on a canyon where mills operated until 1980s, and each family had their own washing stone for doing laundry, for which they had to pay rent to the village. The next morning, the trek led through the canyon towards the east and the Sierra Nevada in perfect biking weather. The GPS track I had was pretty good, but it wasn't always accurate.
Nee, ernsthaft jetzt? Kann doch nicht sein.
80% of the route is dirt roads, and Spain is extremely sparsely populated inland. You often ride for hours without seeing another person. This is the highest location. According to the map, it's 1,300 meters altitude, but it's pretty chilly up here, so it's time to go down. This is the Sierra Nevada mountain range. My trek leads tomorrow up to the clouds and the snowfields, and then always at 2,000 meter altitude around the mountain range.
but I'm not sure if I will drive this because I'm not really prepared. It's 4 degrees up there and pretty cold, and I'm not prepared for these temperatures. And 2 days is pretty hard. Let's see.
The next day it became rainy and colder again, so I decided to take the country road that leads around the Sierra Nevada on the south side at 1,200 meters. It was reasonably dry but still cold. The area is famous throughout Spain for its beautiful mountain villages and air-dried hemp. In the next morning, when I started in Travelers, it had only 4 degrees, so I put on everything I had and my rain gear on top of that. Finding your way out of the Andalusian mountain villages can be difficult because the alleys are so narrow and many roads are dead ends. A few hours later, I reached the highest point of the entire tour at 2,000 meters. It was incredibly cold up there, so I took a few souvenir photos and headed downhill as quickly as possible. Completely frozen to the ground, I finally reached La Calahorra, which is almost 1,000 meters lower. The small town, where there is not much else to see, is dominated by the 15th century castle. The castle is privately owned and rarely open to visitors, but it is spectacular situated against the snow-covered backdrop of the Sierra Nevada and was also a filming location for Game of Thrones. My hotel did not serve breakfast, so I bought a few pieces at the bakery in the next town. Guadix is known for its cave dwellings, of which there are about 2,000, home to between 40 and 100,000 people, depending on the source. I had great respect for the route through the Gorafe desert that lay ahead. In the village of Gorafe, I filled my 3 water bottles to the brim. Here, too, there are still many cave dwellings that remain nice and cool in summer. 50 kilometers solo across the desert. Completely alone, no cell phone service, no roads or settlements. There are several river crossings without bridges and, depending on the water level, they can be impassable, and it had rained a lot in the last few days. At the beginning there are still a few tourists and decent trails, but further north the terrain became increasingly rough. It got really hot and the 3 liters of water practically evaporated. The river crossings were no problem, but the mud in the valleys... Ouch. Super. After a few hours, the tracks got better again, just in time because my 3 liters of water were used up. While the Gorafe desert was hot and dusty, the next day was exactly opposite, wet and cold. After 70 kilometers of loneliness, the Sierra de Cazorla Nature Park is crossed by a road, a handful of houses, a village pub and a hostel. The route leads uphill all day to a plateau of an altitude of 1,800 meters, and the weather was predicted to be cold and rainy again. There is no civilization or cell phone service here either, only a few shelters scattered at the very top.
This is it, the highest point. It's about 1,800 meters. And it took me 4.5 hours with pretty basic e-bike support in order to manage the entire section for today. Now still 500 meters to climb and 30 kilometers.
At 70 kilometers and almost 2,000 meters of elevation gain, and with the low temperatures, you can only ride with low e-bike assistance so that the batteries last. It had rained all night and the forecast didn't look much better, so I set off early. It was cold again, so high up in the mountains, and to warm up I headed straight into a canyon with some pushing passages. The route still led through the Sierras de Cazorla Nature Park, and it was completely deserted. Due to the altitude of over 1,000 meters, it was also cold so early in the year. Shortly before the thunderstorm, I reached my accommodation in Siles, and the next morning it was wet and cold again, so I moved my route from the mountains further east to an old railway line.
What you can see around me is the result of low ENS. The last 2 weeks it was too cold and too wet for this time of the season. So up to tomorrow, sun is expected and Spanish weather. I had this morning already 10 degrees when I came out of the hotel. I considered to cycle topless. It's so cold. I cannot add more layers anymore.
After 2 hours, I reached the Via Verde del Renacimiento. Via Verdes are the coolest way to cycle through Spain. They are old railway lines that have been converted into long-distance cycle paths. Bridges, tunnels and stations are still there, and sometimes the stations have been converted into hotels or restaurants. The railway line had hardly been used, with tracks only laid on some sections, when the project was abandoned due to lack of profitability. The rain caught up with me after all, and I found shelter under an old railway bridge. It was so cold that I had to keep moving, and 20 minutes later it was only a light drizzle.
This tunnel has a length of 500 meters, and there are light barriers at the beginning to enable the light.
Fortunately, the stage to Alcaraz was a short one, and low pressure system Ines gave it her all once again. The next morning the weather was finally good, and it was set to stay that way just in time, because now came a section I had been looking forward to for a long time. The Via Verde from Alcaraz to Albacete, 80 kilometers, many bridges and countless tunnels. The absolute highlight comes soon after setting off. The bridge spans 2 valleys and then disappears into a tunnel. Most tunnels are lit and activated by a light barrier, but some are unlit and sometimes the light in the middle simply switches off. Thanks goodness, smartphones have lights these days.
Light at the end of the tunnel.
Not all sections of the route are drivable. The old stations are mostly ruins, but some have been renovated. This one is used as a community campsite and RV park.
Now we are out of the mountains, obviously, and this section is 10 kilometers just straight on, no curve at all. It's a curve.
Spanish hotels rarely offer breakfast, and restaurants often don't open until around 8:30 p.m. For the same price, you can also find apartments with kitchen and more space. I was almost always able to take my bike into the apartment with me. In Albacete, however, there was the smallest and oldest Otis elevator ever, which was so narrow that I even had to remove the front wheel to get the bike upright into the elevator. From Albacete, it is about 220 kilometers to Valencia. The route leads northeast into the valley of the Rio Chucar. In its upper reaches, it could also be called the Forgotten Valley. The small road winds through a canyon that gets deeper with every kilometer, and countless cave dwellings have been built into the rock walls. The absolute highlight of the area, and found in every travel guide, is Alcalá del Chucar. The town has around 1,000 inhabitants and is located on an old medieval trade and pilgrim route. The Rio Chucar is dammed several times and the valley becomes increasingly desolate. For once I hadn't managed to book my accommodation the night before, so I had to make a 20 kilometers detour. This meant climbing out of the canyon and up onto a plateau in the afternoon heat. But fortunately, from a certain point on, it was all downhill. The last stage of the Altravesur bikepacking route to Valencia mostly runs on small side roads. 120 kilometers and 1,500 meters of elevation gain sum up due to a constant up and down between the river and the plateau. This road bike cyclist had an e-road bike, the electronics had failed and he could only ride in the highest gear. On the way to Valencia we kept meeting each other. He was a little faster downhill and on the flat, but I caught up again uphill and at some point we just rode together. Valencia surprised me in a positive way. It has a beautiful historic city center and everything is spotlessly clean. My stylish, ultra-modern apartment was right in the middle of the old town, surrounded by all the sights. The next bikepacking route I wanted to ride is the Spanish section of the European Divide Trail, which leads from Teruel to France. From Valencia I headed north to Sagunt and, thanks to Google, I found a bike path that leads out of the city without much traffic. The huge castle of Sagunt was built before the Romans, but the Romans built a theater next to it that is still in use today. Unfortunately for me, the castle is closed on Mondays, but thanks to my little drone, I was at least able to take a look inside. A resident working here gave me a tip about a Roman road that was found during the construction of a parking garage. They simply built the parking garage higher so that you can look inside from the side. From Sagunt to Teruel there is another Via Verde, a former railway line. It is very popular and almost everyone rides it from Teruel to Sagunt, as it is over 1,000 meters downhill. Copper used to be mined in Teruel and the state railway wanted such high fees for transporting the ore to the sea that the mining company simply built a second railway line to it. If this investment ever paid off. On my second day on the Via Verde to Teruel, I ran into a serious energy problem. With the low gradient, 100 kilometers and 1,000 meters of elevation gain, should have been easy to manage on an e-bike support level 3 or 4. But in the morning a strong storm came up directly ahead, and after 30% of my route I had already used up 40% of my battery.
I hope it's not because of me. These are maybe about 100 or so.
The batteries only lasted because I rode the remaining 80 kilometers uphill in extreme headwinds in the lowest assistance level, and the last 20 kilometers were downhill. Remaining energy in Teruel 9%. Teruel has a beautiful old town, and my apartment was right next to one of the old watchtowers. From Teruel I headed north on the European Divide Rail, a bikepacking gravel track that runs from Finland down to Portugal. At first I rode a short distance along the Via Verde to Alfambra, but it is no longer maintained and soon became impassable. At least the storm from the previous day had subsided. There is plenty of water in the valleys, and so farmland dominates the landscape. As I paddle across the plateau, I'll quickly explain how I got the e-bike to Gibraltar in the first place. Batteries are considered dangerous goods and are not transported on planes. You would have to transport a battery separately to its destination, so this is out of the question. Traveling by train usually works, but in Spain you can only transport bicycles on local trains, and there is no train line to Gibraltar. If you can find a ferry, it's a cheap but slow option. One-way car rental is possible, but it's expensive and not allowed to cross borders. Intercity buses don't accept e-bikes at the moment. After a long search, I took the French TGV to Marseille. There are 2 bike spaces, but they get booked up very quickly. From there, I took the ferry to Morocco and then another ferry back to Spain. 2.5 days on the ferry with full board, internet and my own cabin costs modest 270 euros, which is fair, you just need a little time. I usually booked accommodation the night before, but on this day, for once, that didn't work out, and I had to take a 25-kilometer detour over 2 mountain passes. It's good if you have your energy management under control for these situations. The detour to the Rio Pitarch Valley to a 4-star hotel at the bottom of the canyon was definitely worth it. The next morning was already very chilly at 900 meters, but I had to cross 2 passes at almost 1,400 meters to get back to my route. It was incredibly cold and windy. Further down in the valleys it was more sheltered from the wind, and I had a second breakfast to warm up.
It's probably the reason why it's called European Divide Trail. Always on the rim and always on the top.
After several days on dirt and forest tracks, I was happy to cycle 70 kilometers of former railway line. The very next morning I set off on the Via Verde del Val de Zafan. This is also where Spain's most famous railway tunnel is located. It was, probably by chance, built in such a direction and angle that the sun shines exactly twice a year through in the morning, making it look as if a huge spotlight has been installed in the tunnel. This Via Verde has lots of tunnels, bridges and old train stations, some of which have been converted into hotels or restaurants. This old rail car now serves as a bistro. At some point, the cozy cruise along the railway line came to an end. The next stage led once again through a beautiful mountain scenery, small villages on the passes and deep valleys in between, quickly adding up a lot of elevation meters. And the many rocky single trails also drained the batteries.
Das war's.
Those were the last relaxed meters before it got really rough, the hardest hours on the entire tour.
Das kann man ja nicht ernst meinen.
Often there are forest tracks near such extreme sections that you can use as an alternative, but that wasn't possible here. Either turn back and take a long detour or press on and get through it.
Ja, und dann geht's gerade so weiter. Wer denkt sich denn so ein? Das ist doch nicht wahr. Wundert mich ehrlich gesagt jetzt auch nicht mehr. Alter Lack, was für... Wie kann man sowas bauen? Oh, das hört nicht auf. This was a complete disaster. Now, who plans that? I mean, I pushed the bike and carry it over whatever 2 kilometers or so. It's useless.
From here, it was a 1000 meters elevation downhill and I regained my composure. After all the hard work, Mont Blanc, my next overnight stop, was a real gem, surrounded by an old city wall and watchtowers. Pretty farmland characterizes the area in northern Spain, and I slowly approached the Pyrenees and could see snow-capped peaks on the horizon for the first time. The Pyrenees are the natural historical border between Spain and France. High mountains, deep canyons and sparse population characterize the landscape.
Geil.
After nearly 4 weeks, the legs are a bit tired, and myself as well.
The nature reserve with the complicated name Chilea Savasona is pretty unknown, but offers spectacular natural scenery with several monasteries. The monks knew where the beautiful spots were. To the west lies the monastery Saint-Pierre de Casaresem and to the east El Far. From the reservoir, the route climbs 400 meters up to the plateau. Hidden in the dense forests are a few gems, but the most famous place in the area is Rupit. This beautiful village has only 300 inhabitants, the rest are tourists. It had rained a lot in the area and only single trails lead from the plateau down to the valley. With my heavy bike, I wanted to avoid this in the slippery and muddy conditions and was looking for an alternative, but
That's not true. It's the only paved road leading down into the valley. I could already see my next village for the overnight.
the road was a 10-kilometer dead-end road and there was no alternative way down. Climbing over the fence or carrying the bike around was also not an option, so I had to cycle back and take the road down. Thankfully, this time was enough juice in my battery. The medieval bridge Pont de Lierca is located at the entrance to the Altravesur Nature Park, which extends to the French border. The exact age of the bridge is unknown, but it is known that a fee was already being charged for crossing it at that time. The route follows the Lierca stream into an almost pathless wilderness. The southern ascent to the Col de Rio pass is extremely steep and just about rideable without the front wheel lifting.
Jesus.
There are also a few chapels along the way for good vibes and protection from bad weather. There are a few real unknown gems hidden away in the valleys. Just a few kilometers from the French border lies a knight's castle in the side valley of the Pyrenees that has been on my bucket list for a long time.
Na dann.
It has had an eventful history, and its location at the end of a gravel road means that few visitors come here and it is rarely open. It owes its current appearance to a renovation around 1900 and it's currently privately owned. The mountains in the background mark the border with France, and then the moment was there.
Made it! 2,000 kilometers, about 30,000 meters in altitude, and 25 days. It was incredible. So this is truly one of the best bikepacking routes in the world. I love it. So for me it's going down to Perpignan, which is only 25 kilometers down, and then back to Germany with a rental car. Thanks for watching and maybe see you soon.